"I was told you need a cook," Ella Thompson said, stepping down from her wagon as gunfire echoed across the Texas plains. Jack Hawthorne crouched behind his overturned kitchen table, rifle clutched against his chest. Dust motes danced through bullet holes in the cabin walls. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung thick in the afternoon air. His last cartridge sat cold in his palm. Through the shattered window, he watched his ex-wife smooth her travel dress with steady hands. Behind her skirts, a small face peered out. Millie, their daughter, 7 years old now, with Ella's dark eyes and his stubborn chin. The shooting stopped. Morrison's men lowered their weapons, confusion rippling through their ranks. A woman and child had just walked into a gunfight as calmly as entering church. Jack's breath caught in his throat. 3 years. 3 years since Ella had taken Millie and disappeared into the vastness of post-war America. 3 years of silence that had carved hollows in his chest deeper than any bullet could. "Well, I'll be," one of Morrison's riders called out. "Looks like Hawthorne's got himself some visitors." Iron Pete Morrison himself sat astride his black stallion, silver teeth glinting beneath his mustache. His pale eyes studied Ella with the calculating gaze of a man who weighed everything in terms of profit and loss. "Ma'am," Morrison tipped his hat with mock courtesy, "this ain't no place for decent folk. My business with Hawthorne here is nearly concluded." Ella's gaze swept over the scattered cattle, the ransacked outbuildings, the trampled vegetable garden. Her expression remained unreadable as stone. "Appears your business involves considerable destruction," she observed. Morrison's laugh carried no warmth. "Sometimes progress requires clearing away the old to make room for the new. Hawthorne's had ample opportunity to accept my generous offer." Jack rose slowly from behind the table, rifle still trained on the window. His legs shook from crouching too long, or maybe from seeing Ella again. Her face had grown leaner, more weathered. Hardship had carved new lines around her eyes, but she stood straight-backed and fearless, the way she always had. "The lady asked you to leave," Jack called out, his voice hoarse from shouting over gunfire. Morrison studied the reunion with interest. "Your woman Hawthorne, interesting timing for a social call," heat flashed in Ella's eyes. "I belong to no man." "Of course not, ma'am. My apologies." Morrison's tone dripped false courtesy. "Well then, I believe we've made our point for today. Hawthorne, you have until tomorrow to reconsider. After that, my patience expires." The riders wheeled their horses and thundered away, leaving clouds of dust that turned the late afternoon sun rust-colored. Jack emerged from the cabin, rifle lowered but ready. Up close, Ella looked even more changed. Her hands bore new calluses. Her dress, though clean and mended, showed signs of long wear. She'd been struggling too. Millie stepped fully from behind her mother's skirts. She wore a blue calico dress and boots that had seen considerable walking. Her hair was braided with the same meticulous care Ella had always shown. "Hello, Papa," Millie said quietly. The word hit Jack like a physical blow. Papa, not Daddy, not Father. Papa, the way she'd said it when she was 4 and followed him around the ranch like a devoted shadow. "Hello, little bird," he managed. Ella's jaw tightened at the old pet name. Another lifetime ago, she used to smile when he called their daughter that. "Your situation appears dire," Ella said, surveying the damage with professional assessment. Jack almost laughed. Dire. His cattle scattered, his fences cut, his last hired hand fled to safer employment. Morrison's daily visits growing more violent, his savings dwindling to nothing. "Could be worse," he said. "How? You could have arrived tomorrow after Morrison finished what he started." Something flickered across Ella's face. Relief maybe, or calculation. "I heard in town you were having difficulties." "Which town?" "Millbrook, 20 miles east." Ella had been close for days, maybe weeks, gathering information. The thought unsettled him. "Who told you? Does it matter?" It did matter, but Jack couldn't articulate why. Everything about Ella's arrival felt too convenient, too precisely timed. She'd always possessed an uncanny ability to appear exactly when needed, whether for birthing calves or mending broken fence posts or holding him together after his father died. I can cook, Ella continued. Clean, help with basic ranch work, in exchange for temporary shelter. Temporary. Until you're back on your feet. Jack studied his daughter, who watched this negotiation with the careful attention of a child accustomed to adult uncertainty. She looked healthy but tired. Her dress fit well, but Jack recognized the fabric from an old skirt of Ella's. They needed sanctuary as much as he needed help. Morrison meant what he said about tomorrow. I assumed as much. Could be dangerous. Most things worth doing are. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of approaching rain. Jack's roof leaked in 3 places. His stores were nearly empty. Winter approached with the inexorable certainty of debt collectors and land grabbers. Why now, Ella? She met his gaze directly. Because running gets tiresome. And because Millie deserves better than constantly looking over her shoulder. Truth, but not the whole truth. Jack recognized the careful phrasing, the way Ella revealed just enough to satisfy immediate questions while keeping deeper motivations hidden. But he was in no position to interrogate motives. Millie can take the small bedroom, you can use the loft. That's acceptable. They stood in the gathering dusk, 3 people bound by blood and history and secrets yet unspoken. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. Morrison would return tomorrow, probably with more men. But tonight, for the first time in months, Jack wouldn't face the darkness alone. Dawn came gray and reluctant, heavy with unspoken tension. Jack woke to the sound of wood splitting. He pulled on his boots and stepped outside to find Ella feeding kindling into the stove. She moved with the efficient grace of someone accustomed to making much from little. Coffee already brewed, biscuits browning in the Dutch oven. The kitchen swept clean of yesterday's debris. Been up long? He asked. Long enough. Millie sat at the scarred wooden table, sketching pictures in the dust with her finger. A horse, a house, a family of 3 stick figures holding hands. Jack's chest tightened. After breakfast, he rode out to gather the scattered cattle while Ella assessed the damage to his household stores. The morning stretched wide and empty, punctuated only by the distant lowing of lost stock and the whisper of wind through broken fence posts. His herd had been decimated. 20 head remained from what had once been 60, the rest driven off or shot for sport. Morrison's signature was written across his land in bullets and boot prints. When Jack returned at midday, he found Ella mending his shirts with thread pulled from her own petticoat. Her hands moved with practiced economy, turning tears into barely visible seams. You don't have to do that. Cloth is precious, she said. Waste is sin. The male rider appeared that afternoon, a weathered man named Curtis who'd known Jack since childhood. He handed over 3 letters, his eyes lingering curiously on Ella as she hung washing on the line. Good to see you got help, Jack, times being what they are. Times are what they've always been. Hard. Curtis nodded toward Ella. She looks familiar. Don't I know her from somewhere? Jack's jaw tightened. Don't reckon you do. But Curtis continued staring until Ella turned away, retreating into the cabin with deliberate casualness. 2 of Jack's letters were bills. The third bore an unfamiliar return address. He tucked it into his shirt pocket without opening it. That evening, Ella prepared supper from ingredients that shouldn't have existed in his empty larder. Beans that tasted of molasses and smoke. Cornbread that crumbled golden and warm. She transformed his meager supplies into something approaching abundance. Where did you learn to cook this way? Necessity teaches all the important lessons. After Millie fell asleep, Jack and Ella sat on the front porch, watching the horizon for signs of Morrison's return. The night stretched endless and star-crowded above them. She's grown, Jack said. Children do. She's got your stubbornness and your restless heart. They sat in silence, the weight of 3 years pressing between them. Jack wanted to ask why she'd left, where she'd been, whether she'd thought of him during the long, empty nights. Instead, he asked, how long can you stay? Long enough. Always the careful answers. Always the walls built from wounded pride and careful words. The next morning brought Morrison and 6 riders. They approached slowly, confident in their numbers. Jack met them in the yard, rifle held loose but ready. Time's up, Hawthorne, Morrison called out. My offer stands. $500 for everything. More than generous for land that's been nothing but trouble. Not interested. Morrison's gaze found Ella, who stood in the doorway with Millie pressed close against her side. Interesting company you're keeping these days. Where exactly did she come from? None of your concern. Everything that happens in this valley is my concern, especially strangers asking questions about property values and railroad surveys. Jack's blood went cold. He glanced at Ella, whose face revealed nothing. Don't know what you're talking about. Morrison smiled. Course you don't. Well, no matter. My patience has limits and you've exceeded them. He gestured to his men. They rowed to Jack's well and dumped something from a cloth sack into the water. The liquid turned murky, then foul-smelling. Shame about your water source, Morrison said. Contamination can be dangerous, especially for children. With that, they wheeled their horses and departed, leaving the stench of poisoned water hanging in the still air. Jack stared at his ruined well, rage building in his chest. Without clean water, the ranch became uninhabitable within days. There's a spring about 2 miles north, Ella said quietly, hidden in the rocks. How do you know that? I used to live here, remember. But her knowledge seemed too specific, too recent. The spring she mentioned was one Jack had discovered only last year. That afternoon, while Millie napped, Jack confronted Ella directly. Morrison seems to think you've been asking questions around town. People talk. I listen. What kind of questions? Ella continued kneading bread dough, her movements steady and deliberate. Practical ones about land prices, property disputes, the railroad survey. Why? Because understanding the situation helps me protect my daughter. Our daughter, Jack wanted to say, but the word stuck in his throat. Is that the only reason you came back? Ella's hand stilled. For a moment, vulnerability flickered across her face. Then the mask returned. Reasons are complicated things. Jack pulled the unopened letter from his pocket. He'd been carrying it for 2 days, afraid to read it. The return address meant nothing to him, but something about Ella's careful answers made his suspicions grow. This came for me, but maybe it was meant for you. Ella glanced at the envelope, and Jack caught the brief flash of recognition before she turned away. I wouldn't know, but she would know. Jack was certain now. Ella's return wasn't coincidence or desperation. She'd come here with purpose, armed with information and secrets she wouldn't share. The question was whether that purpose included saving him or destroying him. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the promise of another storm. In the distance, riders watched from the ridge, patient as buzzards. Morrison would return tomorrow with new torments. The poisoned well was just the beginning, and Jack was beginning to suspect that his ex-wife's arrival might be part of a larger design he couldn't yet comprehend. The letter arrived with the morning mail, addressed to Mrs. E. Thompson in careful script. Jack held it up between 2 fingers, watching Ella's face drain of color. Funny thing, he said. Mail rider knew exactly where to deliver this. Almost like you'd been expecting it. Ella's hands stilled on the breakfast dishes. Steam rose from the wash basin, clouding the space between them. Jack, 3 years, Ella. 3 years of silence, and then you show up the exact day Morrison tries to finish me off. Now mysterious letters are finding their way to my kitchen table. She turned slowly, water dripping from her fingers onto the worn floorboards. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. The envelope sat between them, heavy with secrets. Outside, Millie played in the dirt, building castles from dust and determination. Her laughter drifted through the open window, innocent and trusting. I can't. Jack's patience, worn thin by sleepless nights and constant threats, finally snapped. Can't or won't. He tore open the envelope before Ella could stop him. The letterhead made his blood freeze. Texas Pacific Railroad Company, official correspondence. His eyes scanned the contents, each word hitting harder than Morrison's fists. Status report overdue. Assessment of Hawthorne property required immediately. Payment contingent upon completion of assigned survey. Survey, Jack said, his voice deadly quiet. Ella sank into a chair, her strength seeming to drain away. Jack, please listen. You're working for them, the railroad, the same people sending Morrison to destroy everything I've built. It's not that simple. Seems plenty simple to me. They hired you to spy on your own husband. Former husband. The distinction cut through the air between them, sharp as broken glass. They hired me to assess property values, yes, but not to hurt you. Then why? Ella's composure cracked. The careful mask she'd worn since arriving finally slipped, revealing the desperation underneath. Because I needed the money. Because Millie was sick last winter and the doctor bills nearly killed us. Because I've been cleaning houses and taking in washing for 3 years, barely keeping us fed. Jack stared at her, seeing clearly for the first time the toll their separation had taken. The too thin wrists, the mendied dress worn threadbare at the elbows, the way she rationed food, giving Millie larger portions while claiming she wasn't hungry. You could have come to me, could I? After the way things ended between us. The memory hung heavy in the room. Their last fight. The things they'd said that couldn't be taken back. The door slamming with the finality of a coffin lid. So you took their money instead. I took their money to protect you. By spying on me. By learning what they really wanted. By finding out how much they were willing to pay. By getting you information you could use. Jack crumpled the letter in his fist. Information like what? The railroad wants a straight line through this valley. Your land sits right in the middle of their planned route. Morrison's been buying up properties for half their value, then selling them to the railroad for 10 times what he paid. And you're helping him. I'm helping you. My assessment report is due tomorrow. I was going to tell them your land is worthless. Rocky soil, poor drainage, unsuitable for development. Jack's anger faltered. That's a lie. Of course it's a lie, but it might make them root around you entirely. And cost you your fee. Ella nodded. $500. More money than I've seen in 3 years. The same amount Morrison had offered. Jack understood now why his ex-wife looked so worn, so desperate. She'd been planning to sacrifice her payment to save his ranch. But the betrayal still burned. You should have told me. When? The moment I arrived and you were fighting for your life. Or later when you made it clear you didn't trust me. The accusation hit home because it was true. Jack had been suspicious from the beginning, reading deception into every careful word. Their voices had risen without either noticing. From outside, the sound of Millie's laughter stopped abruptly. "Mama," Millie called. "Papa, are you fighting?" The question cut through their anger, reminding them what was truly at stake. But it was too late. Millie appeared in the doorway, her small face streaked with tears. She looked between her parents, seeing the anger and disappointment written in their rigid postures. "You're fighting about money again," she whispered. Again. The word revealed how many similar arguments the child had overheard during their marriage. How many nights she'd listened to her parents' voices rise in frustration and fear. "Millie, honey," Ella began, but their daughter was already backing away, shaking her head. "You said we were going to be a family again. You promised." She turned and ran, her small boots pounding across the porch and into the yard beyond. Jack and Ella stared at each other, the weight of their failure settling between them. "She heard everything," Ella said. "Everything that mattered." They found Millie's tracks leading toward the broken fence line, small boot prints in the dust heading toward the wild country beyond the ranch. Jack's blood chilled. The terrain was treacherous, full of hidden ravines and abandoned mine shafts, and Morrison's men were still out there somewhere, watching. "She couldn't have gone far," Ella said, but her voice shook. Jack was already saddling his horse. "Get the medical kit, and bring rope." They rode out together, following the fading trail through scrub brush and scattered stones. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, turning their search into a race against time and dehydration. An hour in, they heard it. A thin cry for help, distant and desperate. The old copper mine. Jack should have filled it in years ago, but there'd always been more pressing work. Now his negligence might cost him everything. They found Millie 20 feet down in the abandoned shaft, her leg bent at an unnatural angle. She looked up at them with eyes wide with pain and fear. "Papa, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to fall." Jack's hands shook as he rigged the rope. All their arguments, all their pride and wounded feelings seemed meaningless now. What mattered was getting their daughter home safe. What mattered was that they were still a family, broken but not beyond repair. The rest could wait. Jack descended into the mine shaft hand over hand, the rope burning against his palms. Millie lay crumpled against the rocky wall, her face pale with shock. Her left leg was twisted beneath her, clearly broken. But she was conscious, alert, alive. "Don't move, little bird," Jack whispered, examining the injury. "We're going to get you out of here." Above them, Ella's voice carried down the shaft. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. Lower the medical kit." Working by lamplight in the cramped space, Jack splinted Millie's leg with strips torn from his shirt. His daughter bit her lip to keep from crying out, tears streaming silently down her dust-streaked cheeks. "You're brave," he told her, "braver than your old man." "I was trying to find the place where we used to pick wildflowers," Millie whispered. "Remember, before Mama went away." Jack's throat constricted. He remembered. A hidden meadow where they'd spent Sunday afternoons, Ella weaving flower crowns while Millie chased butterflies through the tall grass. Before everything fell apart. The rescue took 3 hours. Rigging pulleys, securing Millie in a makeshift sling, hauling her inch by agonizing inch to the surface. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk had settled over the valley and Millie had fainted from pain. Ella prepared a bed in the main room where they could watch over her. Jack held their daughter while Ella reset the broken bone with practiced efficiency. "Where did you learn to do that?" "Necessity," Ella replied, the same answer she always gave. But Jack was beginning to understand that necessity had taught Ella many harsh lessons during their years apart. They took turns sitting vigil through the night. When fever came, they bathed Millie's forehead with cool water from the hidden spring. When she cried out in her sleep, they spoke soft words until she settled. In the gray hours before dawn, while Millie slept peacefully, Jack and Ella found themselves alone by the dying fire. "She could have died," Ella said. "But she didn't. Because we got to her in time, because we worked together." The implication hung between them, heavy with meaning. "The way we used to," Jack said, "before pride got in the way." They sat in silence, watching the embers pulse red and gold. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and the distant sound of cattle lowing. "I never wanted to leave," Ella said finally. Jack's hand stilled on his coffee cup. "You packed your bags. After you made it clear there was no place for us here." "I never said that. You didn't have to. Every time we went to town, I could see it in your face. The shame. The way you looked at people looking at us." Jack stared into the fire, memory cutting deep. He remembered those trips to town, the stares and whispers, the way conversations stopped when they entered the general store. But he'd thought he was protecting them by ignoring the looks, by pretending they didn't matter. "I was proud to be your husband," he said. "Then why couldn't you say so? Why couldn't you tell Mrs. Henderson to mind her own business when she made those comments about mixed families? Why did you just stand there?" "Because fighting would have made things worse." "For who?" Jack had no answer. The truth was he'd been afraid. Afraid of losing business, afraid of making enemies, afraid of the violence that might follow if he pushed back too hard. "I thought silence was protection," he said. "Silence was surrender. It told everyone that you agreed with them." "Including you," Ella nodded. "Including me." Jack set down his cup and turned to face her fully. "I never agreed with them. I thought you were the finest woman I'd ever known. Still do, but you never said it, not when it mattered. I'm saying it now, 3 years too late." The words cut, but Jack absorbed them without flinching. She was right. His cowardice had cost them everything. "What about you?" he asked. "Why did you really come back?" Ella was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I'm tired of running, tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of pretending that leaving was the right choice." "Was it the wrong choice?" "I don't know. Maybe we were both wrong. Maybe we were both too proud and too scared to fight for what we had." Jack reached across the space between them, his calloused fingers brushing hers. She didn't pull away. "The railroad job," he said. "I'll submit the false report tomorrow. Tell them your land is worthless." and lose your fee. Some things matter more than money. Like what? Ella looked toward the bed where Millie slept, her small face peaceful in the lamplight. Like giving our daughter a chance to pick wildflowers in that meadow again. Jack's chest tightened. Even if it means staying here, dealing with people's stares and comments. Let them stare. Let them talk. We know who we are. And who are we? A family, broken maybe, but still a family. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the window glass. The drought was breaking. The poisoned well could be cleaned and refilled. But other storms were gathering. At first light, a rider approached under a white flag. Not Morrison this time, but one of his men bearing a message. Jack read it twice, his expression growing darker. "What is it?" Ella asked. "Morrison knows about your railroad connection. He's threatening to expose you as a spy unless I sell to him by noon today." "Let him talk. What can he prove?" "More than we'd like, probably. And even if he can't prove anything, the accusation alone will turn every rancher in the valley against us." Ella's face hardened. "So we run again, or we fight." "How?" "Morrison has 6 men. We have a broken-legged child and a water supply that tastes of kerosene." Jack folded the letter carefully, his mind working. Morrison had made one mistake. He'd assumed Jack and Ella were still the same frightened people who'd let fear drive them apart. But shared crisis had reminded them what they were capable of when they stood together. "We fight smart," Jack said. "The way you taught me. I never taught you to fight. You taught me that sometimes the best defense is making your enemy think they've already won." Ella's eyes sharpened with understanding. "The railroad report. What if Morrison's threat actually helps us?" "How?" Jack smiled grimly. "Because now we know exactly what he's afraid of." Ella sat at the kitchen table, pen hovering over the railroad company's assessment form. The morning light slanted through the window, illuminating the careful lies she was about to commit to paper. Rocky soil, poor drainage, unsuitable for development. Each false word would cost her $500 and 3 months of desperate work. But it might save Jack's ranch. "You sure about this?" Jack asked, checking his rifle for the 3rd time. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." She signed her name with deliberate strokes, sealing her sacrifice in ink. Morrison's deadline was noon. 2 hours to decide whether to surrender everything or fight with empty hands and righteous fury. Millie lay propped up in bed, her splinted leg elevated on pillows. Despite the pain, she watched her parents with sharp intelligence. "Are the bad men coming back today?" she asked. "Probably," Jack said, "but we're ready for them." Millie nodded solemnly. At 7 years old, she'd already learned that adult promises often crumbled under pressure. At 11:30, dust clouds appeared on the horizon. Morrison rode with 8 men this time, confident in his overwhelming advantage. Jack met them in the yard, Ella standing beside him, a united front against the gathering storm. "Time's up, Hawthorne," Morrison called out. "My offer still stands, but only for the next 5 minutes. Keep your money." Morrison's smile turned predatory. "Figured you'd say that, which is why I brought some friends who might change your mind." He gestured toward the riders flanking him. Jack recognized 2 as local ranchers who'd already sold out to Morrison's pressure. "Tell him Henderson," Morrison commanded. The older rancher shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Sorry, Jack, but we can't have spies and railroad agents stirring up trouble in our valley." "Ella's not a spy." "Evidence says otherwise." Morrison produced a leather portfolio from his saddlebags. "Official correspondence, payment agreements, instructions for property assessment." Jack's blood ran cold. Somehow Morrison had gotten copies of Ella's railroad contract. "She told me about the job," Jack said. "Did she tell you about the bonus payment for securing your signature on the sale documents? Did she mention that her fee doubles if she can convince you to sell voluntarily?" Jack's world tilted. He turned to stare at Ella, searching her face for denial. She stood frozen, her complexion ashen. "Ella, it's not what you think." But her voice carried no conviction. Morrison's accusations had the ring of truth, and everyone present could hear it. "Course it's not," Morrison said mockingly. "Just coincidence that she showed up right when you were most desperate." Just luck that she offered to help right when you needed it most. Jack felt the ground crumbling beneath his feet. Every tender moment, every shared glance, every word of reconciliation had been calculated manipulation. The bonus clause was in the original contract, Ella said quietly, but I never intended to use it. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I knew how it would look. It looks like betrayal. Again, the words hung in the air between them, poisoning everything they'd rebuilt. Morrison sensed victory. $500, Hawthorne. Final offer. Take it, or we'll make sure everyone in the territory knows about your wife's little arrangement. Jack stared at the man who destroyed his water, scattered his cattle, and poisoned his community against him. Behind Morrison's triumphant grin lay the promise of endless harassment, escalating violence, and ultimate defeat. But surrender meant abandoning everything his father had built, everything he'd hoped to leave for Millie. Go to hell, Jack said. Morrison's expression hardened. Wrong answer. He raised his hand and his men began to dismount, not for a gunfight but for systematic destruction. They would tear down his fences, drive off his remaining cattle, burn his crops. Death by 1,000 cuts. Wait, Ella stepped forward. There's something you should know about that railroad contract. Morrison paused, curious despite himself. I submitted my assessment this morning. Told them Jack's land is worthless. Rocky soil, poor drainage, completely unsuitable for their purposes. You're lying. Ella pulled the carbon copy from her apron pocket. See for yourself. Morrison snatched the paper, his eyes scanning the damning assessment. His face went purple with rage. You stupid woman, do you have any idea what you've done? Cost you your commission. Cost us both everything. The railroads already paid me half my fee based on preliminary surveys. When they get your report, they'll want their money back. Jack watched this exchange with growing confusion. Morrison's fury seemed disproportionate to a simple change in railroad routing, unless there was more at stake than land acquisition. How much did they pay you? Jack asked. Morrison's silence spoke volumes. How much, Pete? Enough, Morrison said finally. Enough to buy every ranch in this valley and sell them for 10 times what they're worth. The scope of the conspiracy became clear. Morrison hadn't been working for the railroad. He'd been working against it, using their preliminary surveys to identify valuable land, then intimidating owners into selling cheap. Ella's false assessment had just collapsed his entire scheme. So now what? Jack asked. You kill us to keep your secret. Morrison looked around at his men, seeing doubt creeping into their faces. They'd signed on for intimidation, not murder, and witnesses were everywhere. This isn't over, Morrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. A man who'd built his power on deception couldn't afford to operate in the light. Yes, it is, Ella said, because I made copies of everything. Your payments, your correspondence, your threats. It's all documented. Morrison's face went white. You're bluffing. Marshall's office in Austin has a complete file. Anything happens to us, they'll know exactly where to look. For the first time since Jack had known him, Iron Pete Morrison looked afraid. The riders departed without another word, leaving only dust and the promise of eventual reckoning. Jack and Ella stood in the sudden silence, the weight of truth settling between them. The Marshal, Jack said. Is that where all those mysterious letters were going? Ella nodded. I've been building a case against Morrison for weeks. Every threat, every act of sabotage, every illegal land grab. While working for the railroad. While appearing to work for the railroad. The Marshal needed inside information about their operations. Jack stared at his ex-wife, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. Not the frightened woman who'd fled 3 years ago, but a calculating strategist who just outmaneuvered the most dangerous man in the territory. You've been planning this since you arrived. Since before I arrived, the Marshal contacted me 2 months ago, asked if I'd help gather evidence. And you said yes. I said yes because Morrison destroyed our marriage the first time. I wasn't going to let him destroy our second chance. The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. Second chance. The words Jack had been afraid to hope for. In the distance, thunder rumbled across the vast Texas sky. The marshal arrived 3 hours later with 6 deputies and a warrant for Morrison's arrest. Jack watched from his porch as they rode up the valley road, badges glinting in the afternoon sun. Behind them followed a wagon carrying chains and the weight of justice too long delayed. Marshal Crawford was a weathered man with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much frontier violence. He dismounted slowly, studying the bullet holes in Jack's cabin walls. "Mrs. Thompson, I presume," he said, tipping his hat to Ella. "Marshal Crawford, thank you for coming. Your evidence was quite compelling. Morrison won't be bothering anyone for a long time." Jack stepped forward, still trying to understand the scope of what Ella had orchestrated. "How long have you been investigating him?" "2 years, but we needed someone on the inside. Someone Morrison would trust enough to reveal his methods. And you chose Ella." "She chose herself. Contacted my office after hearing about the railroad surveys. Said she had personal reasons for wanting Morrison stopped." Jack looked at his ex-wife with new comprehension. Her return hadn't been about money or desperation. It had been about justice. "Where is Morrison now?" Ella asked. "Austin jail, along with 3 of his men. The others are scattered to the wind, probably halfway to Mexico by now." Crawford pulled out a leather folder thick with documents. "We found these in Morrison's safe. Property deeds, forged contracts, correspondence with corrupt railroad officials. He's been running this scheme across 3 counties. What happens to the ranchers who sold to him? They get their land back. Morrison's sales are void, conducted under fraudulent pretenses." Jack felt the weight of months of fear lifting from his shoulders. His neighbors would return. The valley would heal. "There's one more thing," Crawford said. "The railroad company wants to make amends. They're offering fair market value for a small strip of land for a depot, enough to make you comfortable." Jack glanced at Ella, seeing the future spreading before them. Financial security, safety, the chance to rebuild what they'd lost. "I'll consider it," he said. After the marshal departed, the family sat together on the porch as sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Millie dozed against Ella's shoulder, her broken leg healing with the resilience of childhood. "You could have told me," Jack said quietly. "Could I? Would you have believed me? Or would you have assumed it was another betrayal?" Jack considered this, remembering his suspicions, his readiness to assume the worst. Probably the latter. Trust has to be earned back. On both sides. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the first stars emerge. In the distance, cattle lowed peacefully. The poisoned well was being cleaned. Fences would be mended. "What happens now?" Jack asked. "Now we decide if we're brave enough to try again." "Are we?" Ella's hand found his in the darkness. "I think we might be." The next morning brought neighbors. Ranchers whose land had been returned, families who'd fled Morrison's terror and were now coming home. They arrived with tools and willing hands, ready to help repair the damage. Mrs. Henderson was among them, the same woman whose cruel comments had driven wedges between Jack and Ella years before. She approached with hesitant steps, wringing her hands. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, "I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually." Ella continued kneading bread dough, her movements steady and sure. "Apologies are freely given when they're truly meant. They are. What I said before about mixed families, about people knowing their place, I was wrong. Fear makes people say terrible things." "Yes, it does. I'd like to make amends if you'll let me." Ella looked up from her work, studying the older woman's face. Whatever she saw there satisfied her. "There's plenty of work to be done. Extra hands are always welcome." By afternoon, the ranch buzzed with activity. Men replaced broken fence posts while women cleaned and organized the damaged household. Children played in the yard, their laughter echoing across the valley. Jack found himself working alongside neighbors who'd once crossed the street to avoid him. The crisis had burned away pretense, revealing the fundamental decency that lived beneath surface prejudices. As evening approached, the volunteers departed, leaving promises to return tomorrow. The work would continue until everything was restored. Jack and Ella sat on their rebuilt porch, watching Millie chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Her leg was nearly healed, her spirit completely restored. "She's happy," Ella observed. "She's home." "Are we home, I mean?" Jack looked at his wife, seeing the woman he'd fallen in love with so many years ago. Older now, weathered by hardship and strengthened by survival, but still the same fierce heart, the same quiet courage. "If you'll have me, I think I might." 3 months later, they remarried in the same valley where they'd first met. The ceremony was simple, attended by neighbors who'd once whispered behind their backs and now stood as witnesses to their second chance. The depot was being built on the northern edge of Jack's property, bringing prosperity and connection to the isolated valley. The railroad company had kept its word, paying generously for the small strip of land. But the real wealth lay in simpler things. Mornings spent working side by side, evenings on the porch sharing quiet conversation, the sound of Millie's laughter as she picked wildflowers in the hidden meadow they'd rediscovered. On quiet nights, when the wind carried the distant sound of train whistles, Jack and Ella would sit together and remember how close they'd come to losing everything, how pride and fear had nearly destroyed what love had built. They'd learned that some things were worth fighting for. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. And that sometimes, the most important journeys led not to distant places, but back home to the people who mattered most. The valley stretched before them, wide and welcoming under the endless Texas sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to test their renewed commitment. But tonight, they were exactly where they belonged, together. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.